Have you ever stopped to wonder when we as a species just kind of flipped a switch? When we went from seeing a lightning storm as a tantrum from an angry god to, looking for things like atmospheric pressure. Well, that massive shift, the actual birth of science and philosophy, really boils down to one person in ancient Greece.
I mean, seriously, think about it. Before this guy, Thales, the world was basically a giant divine soap opera. A storm rolls in, Zeus is ticked off. Your crops fail, some other god is probably holding a grudge. But then Thales comes along. He looks at that exact same storm and doesn't ask who is angry. He asks what is causing it. And that simple, tiny change in the question, well, it changed everything.
Okay, so to really get how huge of a leap this was, we got to step into a time machine. We need to see the world he was born into. A world where every rustle of the leaves, every crash of a wave, was the whisper of a god.
Thales was from a place called Miletus, and you got to picture it. It was this super busy, bustling port city, a real intellectual melting pot. You had ideas flowing in from Egypt, from Babylon, from all over. But here's the wild part. Even in this worldly place, the basic operating system for society was myth. Homer's epic poems, those were their science textbooks. The gods weren't just stories, they were the explanation for literally everything.
So what was his first radical step away from all these gods? Well, he made a claim that, let's be honest, sounds just as bizarre as any myth. He looked at all the complexity in the world around him and basically said, you know what? Everything, you, me, the stars, it's all just water.
Now, before you write him off, we need to wrap our heads around one really important Greek word, arche. See, Thales wasn't just taking a wild guess. He was inventing the very idea that there could be a single, fundamental substance that everything else comes from. Just think about that for a second. For the first time, someone was saying that the insane, beautiful complexity of the world could be boiled down to one single understandable thing. No gods required. Which brings us to the obvious question, right? Of all the things he could have picked, why water? To us, it sounds, well, kind of simplistic. But Thales wasn't just guessing, he was observing. He was using the best scientific tool he had, his own eyes. He just looked around him, and what did he see? Water is absolutely everywhere. It's essential for life. Nothing grows without it. It's a master of disguise, right? It can be solid ice, liquid water, and then disappear into steam. He probably looked at the ground he was standing on and figured it was all just floating on a giant ocean. Even life itself, he thought, starts from a moist seed. From his point of view, the evidence was pretty compelling.
And this right here, this is the core of his genius. Because let's be totally clear, he was completely wrong. Everything is not made of water. But that's the least important part of this whole story. For the very first time in recorded history, someone tried to explain the universe without using a supernatural story. He looked for a natural cause. His answer was wrong, but his method, the very act of asking that kind of question, that was the real revolution.
And this new way of thinking wasn't just some philosophical game he was playing in his head. No, Thales put this rational approach to work, using it to solve real, tangible problems that had stumped people for generations.
He's known as the first true Greek mathematician. He probably learned a lot of practical geometry from the Egyptians. Rules for measuring land or building things. But he wasn't happy just knowing that a rule worked. He kept asking, why? He wanted to prove it, logically, so he knew it would be true every single time. He turned measurement into a science.
For example, how in the world do you measure a giant Egyptian pyramid with no modern tools? His solution was so simple, it's brilliant. He just put a stick in the sand. And he waited. He waited for the exact moment in the day when the stick's shadow was the same length as the stick itself. He reasoned that at that precise instant, the pyramid's shadow had to be equal to its height. All he had to do was measure the shadow. No magic, no divine intervention. Just a stick, a shadow, and an incredible mind.
And his brilliance went way beyond geometry. The stories about his practical wisdom became legendary, and they all served as proof that this new, rational way of looking at the world had incredible power.
This might be his most famous story. Using astronomical data, probably from Babylon, he made a ridiculously bold prediction. A solar eclipse was going to happen in 585 BCE. And, as luck would have it, on that day, two massive armies were in the middle of a vicious battle. Then, right on cue, the sun just vanished. The soldiers were terrified. They saw it as a divine sign and immediately stopped fighting. But Thales, he saw it as proof that the universe isn't random. It's a predictable system. He took a terrifying omen and turned it into a natural event.
So there's this great legend that people used to give him a hard time for being a poor philosopher. Like, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? So, to make a point, he used his knowledge of weather patterns to predict a huge olive harvest. Then, he quietly put a deposit on every single olive press in the city. When the massive harvest came in, he had a complete monopoly and made a fortune. But his point was never about the money. It was to show that a thinker could be rich, they just had more important things to do.
Is this kind of real-world smarts that got him named one of the 7 sages of Greece. His advice had consequences. He told sailors to use the Little Bear constellation to navigate because it was more accurate. He even made a political call that ended up saving his entire city from being conquered. This was not a guy with his head in the clouds. His reason shaped the world around him.
So, when you put all of this together, the water, the pyramid, the eclipse, what is the real, lasting legacy of this man who just never stopped asking why?
Centuries after Thales, another brilliant philosopher, Aristotle, summed it up perfectly. He said Thales was the one who started the journey from mythos, which is explaining the world with stories, to logos, explaining it with reason and logic. And that journey, from myth to logic, pretty much defines the modern world. And Thales was the guy at the starting line.
Ultimately, Thales didn't leave us a set of answers to memorize or some dogma to believe in. His legacy is so much more powerful. He left us a method. He gave humanity maybe the most radical and optimistic idea ever, that the universe isn't a chaotic, unknowable mystery. It's a puzzle that is fundamentally understandable, and the tool for understanding it, our own minds. That single idea is the foundation for pretty much all of Western philosophy and science.
So that's what we're left with. Thales's big answer about water was wrong. But that one wrong answer sparked centuries of better and better answers that followed. It all began because he dared to ask a completely different kind of question. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if the greatest answers aren't out there waiting to be found, but are actually waiting for someone to be brave enough to ask the next great question?